I built an autonomous AI finance agent with Claude that continuously operates like a real FP&A workflow. So instead of using Claude like a temporary chatbot where every analysis resets after a single conversation, the system continuously monitors the business in the background. It maintains context across reporting periods. It identifies operational changes and risks all automatically, and then generates executive-ready financial analysis without requiring repeated manual work. And the important part here is that this is not about replacing finance professionals. It's about removing repetitive operational reporting so that finance professionals can spend less time manually repeating the same monthly process and more time on actual strategic decision making. I'm going to show you how to build this continuously running finance agent that monitors reporting folders for new monthly P&Ls, analyzes the business automatically, tracks changes across reporting periods, detects things like margin deterioration or churn inconsistencies or CAC inefficiencies and profitability shifts, and then generates and emails CFO-ready variance analysis completely on its own. Now, if you want the prompts and the workflow files from this build, they're all in my free community, and that's linked in the description below. For now, let's get into it. Connecting the tools. Before anything gets built, it is worth knowing the shape of what's coming up. So this whole build happens in Claude and it runs in 3 different stages. Setup, where we connect the tools. Building, where we create the agent itself. Then running and deploying it. So we're starting with the setup because Claude needs its tools connected before the agent has anything to work with. We need a starting position from 0. So what do we build and where do we start in Claude? The agent reaches external systems through MCP connections, and we're going to connect it to both Google Drive and to Gmail directly, but there's one small catch here. The Gmail MCP on its own does not have the ability to send emails. So Zapier is what we use to solve that problem, because Zapier's Gmail connection does have send access. And that's the main reason we put Zapier in this build. The second reason is to do with redundancy. Zapier's Google Drive connection can act as a fallback if the primary Google Drive MCP fails for any particular reason. So I go to the Zapier website, just zapier.com, and then I log in with my Google account and I open the MCP server section from the left sidebar. Now this is where Zapier lets external AI systems connect to its app integrations through a single secure endpoint. I create a new MCP server for Claude and then add the 2 apps that the agent will use. Google Drive for finding and reading the monthly P&L files, and Gmail for sending the executive report. Inside the tool permissions for Google Drive, I enable the full set of file access actions, listing folders, reading file contents, retrieving metadata, and accessing prior reports. Now, without these, the agent cannot detect new uploads or compare against history. For Gmail, I enable send email along with the supporting permissions for drafts and for threads. Now, these permissions are the part that gets overlooked most often. The reasoning can be excellent, but the workflow breaks the moment the agent tries to do something it does not have the right to do. So granting the right scope at the MCP layer is what gives the agent the operational capability instead of just the analytical capability. Creating the agent. Now that the tools are connected, the setup phase is done and the building phase begins. Now this is where the actual agent gets created. So I open Claude console and I go into the managed agents quick start. Now the way we build this is going to be in layers. I'm going to add 3 prompts in sequence, and each one giving the agent a new capability. And by the end of this phase, the agent can analyze a finance report and write an executive review. And after that, I'll show you how to run it and then deploy it. Now the order of those 3 prompts matters because the first sets up the infrastructure, and the second adds the core operation layer, and then the third makes the agent autonomous. Now each layer can be validated on its own before the next one goes on top. So if you stack everything into a single instruction and something breaks, you have no idea which part was responsible for it breaking. Building it in layers keeps the system debuggable. I paste the first prompt and it tells the agent to connect Google Drive, Gmail, and Zapier to validate that it can access files and to send emails, and set up a fallback routing for each type of action. For file access, Google Drive is the primary connection and Zapier is the backup. For sending email, Zapier is the primary and Gmail is the backup. The routing is deliberately different for each, and getting that direction right is what keeps the agent running smoothly, even if one integration has a temporary issue. Then it creates 2 local tracking files before doing anything else, and one of those files is a JSON that tracks which monthly reports the agent has already handled, and the other one is an error log that captures anything that goes wrong during execution. The state file is the part that makes the workflow stateful. Now, without it, the agent has no memory between cycles. It would reanalyze the same April report every time the loop runs and send the same email forever. The processed files, JSON, is what tells the agent which months are already done so that it can only act on truly new data. The error log serves a different purpose. If a file fails to parse or an MCP call times out, then the agent logs the issue and it continues without crashing the whole pipeline. And that is how the workflow stays reliable in real world conditions where the files arrive in maybe unexpected formats and maybe APIs occasionally misbehave. I also tell the agent explicitly not to start analyzing yet, not to begin monitoring, and not to process any files. Right now, the only job is operational readiness. Claude generates the agent configuration automatically from the prompt. I then click Create Agent, and on the environment screen, I select Limited to MCP hosts. This restricts the runtime to only talking to the 3 approved MCP endpoints and no open internet access. Now that matters for finance workflows where the agent will be touching sensitive reporting data. I click Start Session and Claude prompts me to create a credential vault. Now the vault stores the OAuth connections for Google Drive, Gmail, and Zapier securely so that the agent does not need to re-authenticate every time a session starts. I authorize each integration one by one. Once all 3 shows connected, then the infrastructure layer is done. Adding the core operation layer. Now I extend the agent with the second prompt. Now this is where the agent stops being a connected automation framework and gets its core operation layer, the financial reasoning and the reporting logic that tells it how to behave as an FP&A analyst. The prompt covers 2 things: what to analyze and how to communicate it. So on the analysis side, the agent is instructed to examine revenue trends, gross margin movement, operating expenses, EBITDA, cash position, customer growth, CAC efficiency, churn, and net revenue retention. For a SaaS business, these are basically the metrics that really matter. Revenue alone does not tell you the story. You need to see whether the business is improving or deteriorating underneath the headline numbers. One instruction in this prompt does, I think, more work than any other. The agent must never fabricate missing data. Now, if a number is unclear, or if it's incomplete, or it's inconsistent with other metrics, it flags the ambiguity instead of just filling in a plausible guess. Now that single rule is what makes the workflow safe to put in front of leadership. A finance system that confidently invents numbers is a lot worse than no system at all. The second half of the prompt defines the executive reporting standard. So every email follows the same structure. Subject line in a fixed format, executive summary is capped at 5 sentences, and then sections for key financial changes, operational KPI analysis, risks ranked by severity, recommended actions, and a board-style overall assessment at the end. Now the reason this matters is to do with consistency. Finance leadership wants to open the email and know exactly where to find the margin commentary or the risk section and the recommendations. If every report looks different, then the system feels unreliable even when the analysis underneath might be reliable and correct. The reporting standard turns the agent into something that produces the same shaped output every single cycle. Now, writing style is also specified. The agent is told to maintain CFO level professionalism, to write concisely, and to avoid anything that sounds promotional or speculative. Now, these constraints matter because without them, the output tends to drift into generic language that doesn't really hold up in front of a finance leadership team. Now, after submitting this prompt, Claude updates the agent configuration with the financial reasoning and reporting framework layered on top of the existing infrastructure. So the agent can now analyze SaaS P&L files and produce structured executive output. But what it cannot do yet is run that process automatically without being triggered, turning it autonomous. The third and final prompt is where the agent becomes truly autonomous. So up to this point, it can analyze a file if you point it to the specific file. But this prompt tells it to watch out for new files on its own and to run the full workflow whenever one appears. Now, the monitoring loop is pretty straightforward. The agent continuously scans the monthly P&L folder in Google Drive. And each cycle, it lists the files available, compares that list against the tracking file of already processed reports, and then checks whether anything new has appeared. Now, if there's nothing new, then it waits 30 seconds and then it runs the cycle again. If a new file is detected, it then retrieves the file, it runs the full FP&A analysis, and it generates the executive report and emails to the designated recipient immediately. Now, after a file is processed, its ID gets written to the tracking file, and that's how the agent knows not to analyze the same report again on the next cycle. The fallback routing from the infrastructure layer still applies here. The error handling rule is the one that keeps the agent stable in production. Now, if a file fails to parse, if an MCP call times out, or if Zapier has a temporary issue, then the agent logs the problem and it just keeps on going. It doesn't crash, it doesn't stop, it just skips the bad file and continues monitoring. Now, without that rule, a single malformed upload would take the entire workflow offline completely. So once this prompt runs, the configuration now describes a continuous monitoring loop and the agent is ready to run. Running the agent. With the building phase done, the agent is now fully configured. So now we can move into the last phase, which is running it and deploying it as a system that operates on its own. Now, before I started, I checked the deployed configuration. The environment shows network access locked to MCP hosts. The tool permissions for Google Drive, Gmail, and Zapier all show the right actions enabled. The monitoring folder has one April P&L file already sitting in it, ready to be picked up. I click test run and a session opens. The startup instruction matches the prompt layers I gave it, so I leave it as is and then I just press enter. The session goes active and the execution trace starts populating in real time on the right side of the screen. Now, the first thing the agent does is initialize the tracking files and run the monitoring loop. It scans the drive folder, sees the April P&L, recognizes it as new, and then starts processing. The trace shows the file retrieval, the data extraction, and the analysis kicking off. While April is still being analyzed, I drop in a May P&L into the same folder. Then I split the screen so I can watch the execution trace on one side and Gmail on the other. A few moments later, the first email lands. The April report comes in fully structured. Executive summary at the top, financial changes, KPI analysis, risks, recommendations, and overall assessment. The agent identifies the business as a growth stage SaaS company sitting near break even and explains the operational pattern behind the margin shape. It also flags an inconsistency in the churn metric where the numbers do not reconcile against the customer counts and the NRR figure. That kind of skepticism is exactly what you want from an FP&A analyst working through a new data set for the first time. Then the May report processes, and this is where the workflow gets interesting because the agent now has prior month context. The May email comes through with a real month-over-month variance. Revenue moved up, but profitability deteriorated. The agent connects that to sales and marketing expansion, CAC efficiency dropping, and margin compression. It also carries forward the churn inconsistency from April and reasons through whether the data quality issue is structural. I upload June, July, and August, and September as well, into the folder one at a time. And the agent then picks each one up on the next polling cycle. It runs the analysis against the accumulated history, and then it emails the report. Now, by September, the agent is producing 6-month trend commentary, downgrading risks it flagged earlier that have now resolved, and updating its overall business assessment based on the new evidence. That continuity is the part that really matters with all of this. The agent is not summarizing each spreadsheet in isolation. It's carries forward conclusions from previous cycles. It validates whether earlier concerns played out, and it refines its narrative as more data lands. And that is what real FP&A work looks like over a full reporting year, and it's what the workflow needs to produce to be useful at the executive level. Between each cycle, the execution trace shows the sleep interval and the polling, then the standby state. Now, the agent is operating as an always-on service rather than a one-off run. Deploying the agent. The test run validated the behavior. Now I want the agent set up so it can run as a real deployed system rather than just a quick start test. I stop the active session through the actions menu. The session winds down gracefully, the state files stay preserved, and the runtime moves to idle. From the agent management page, I open a fresh session against the same deployed agent. Same configuration, same MCP integrations, and same prompt layers, but a clean execution container. I give it a short instruction to start the monitoring loop and check for new files. The agent goes active, revalidates the MCP connections, initializes the tracking files, and resumes the same autonomous loop behavior I saw in the first run. And from here, it can just run indefinitely. Now, this is the part that makes the architecture real. The agent is not tied to a single fragile session. The configuration lives independently, and anytime you spin up a new runtime against the deployed agent, the full workflow comes back with it. And that is what allows the same agent to be deployed against production reporting environments without rebuilding the logic every time. The demo used Google Drive and Gmail because they're easy to show on screen, but the same architecture extends naturally. You can replace Google Drive with Snowflake, an ERP or a planning system. You can also replace Gmail with Slack, Teams, or whatever your finance team uses for distribution. The agent shape stays the same, but what changes is just the systems it sits on top of. The polling interval scales the same way. The 30-second sleep was set so that the cycles are visible on screen when I'm showing them now, but a real finance workflow does not get a new P&L every 30 seconds. So depending on the use case, the interval would be a day or a week or a month matched to when reports actually land. That's it. The loop logic doesn't change. You're just adjusting how often it checks. And that's the full build. Claude's managed agent orchestrating the whole workflow with Zapier connected as one of the integrations for email and file fallback. The agent handles the monitoring, the extraction, the variance work, and the executive communication. And it's just your judgment is what makes it all useful. Now remember, if you want the workflow files or the prompt templates from this video, they're all in my free community, which is linked in the description below. And I'll see you next time.